Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean,
I write about AI news here at Tech Target in Massachusetts.
and I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
And don't forget about Google Bard.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Welcome again to another episode of the Targeting AI podcast. Sean and I are speaking to Wendy Gonzalez, CEO of Sama, a data labeling vendor. Wendy has been at Sama for 8 years. Before then, she served as Vice President of Product and Architecture at Cycle 30. She has also worked for several consulting organizations and currently serves as a board member for the Leila Jaina Foundation. Welcome, Wendy, to today's podcast.
Thank you so much, Esther. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you're a CEO for a data labeling vendor. Can you just give us a brief overview of what that entails in that job and how Sama works with its customers?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. So, data is at the heart of AI, right? So, effectively, what artificial intelligence does is it, of course, attempts to understand large volumes of data and then, predict outcomes, right? So, all AI is based off of data. And that's really where we sit. So we are a data labeling company. We help transform, process, and structure unstructured data. So, specifically, where we primarily focus is computer vision. And that is basically being able to label and structure images, videos, 3D, and LiDAR data for use in applications like self driving cars, surgical robots, crop disease detection, things of that nature.
Sama is not only woman-led, but was also founded by a woman. How does that affect the way the company carries itself in a male-dominated industry? How does that affect the handling of data, if at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I've always been a firm believer in diversity. We can't help but bring ourselves to work, our experiences, as a child of immigrants, as a mom, as a sister, as many other things that we do. So I think that diversity is incredibly important. I've never been a fan of having a bunch of people agree with me when I get to a meeting or to business. So I think bringing diverse views are incredibly important, and particularly in the space of AI. Artificial intelligence is a technology that pervades like all of our everyday, right? From your phones to the way that we communicate to what's out on the internet. And so it's incredibly important that we have diverse perspectives brought into this because it's a global technology. It transcends location and gender. So having that representation, I think, is really important. And we made a specific focus on diversity. So we actually have over 50% women in our company, and that is our labeling teams, all the way actually up through management. So I think that diversity is really important, and it becomes in particularly important in building AI because if we had the same sort of group of people building a technology that's meant for global use, I think that'd be challenging. So the diversity is helpful.
Okay, so you and Esther spoke a couple of years ago, and she did a story on you about your being mission driven. I think you're a B corporation too, and you hire internationally in underrepresented countries underrepresented in the tech business, like Kenya. So you're a B Corp, but you've also faced some criticisms of labor practices that I think was your contractor. But how do you marry those two, the mission driven part and that concern, and then you know good humane labor practices? And everybody wants to know, like, the $2 an hour or $3 an hour to the Kenyan workers was above the prevailing wage, yes, but was it a why not go much higher than the prevailing wage? Go $2 or $3 higher to make yourself really stand out as mission driven.
Yeah, well, let me maybe start with what the purpose of our social mission is, and then I can address all those components. So we're incredibly proud of our track record. So we do work in Kenya and Uganda. We have a purposeful hiring model to where the qualifications to come and get full time employment with comprehensive benefits is not based off of having a degree or having previous work experience. Right. So that's usually how people get hired is you get hired based off of I've got a college degree or I'm working in this industry. So our goal is to provide digital upskilling and a first time work experience because our hypothesis And what we've seen and proven is that once you're able to get a job, you're able to then continue to get jobs. And that first employment is really critical, especially if you don't have a degree or you don't have the network. That's the biggest barrier to employment. So that is really our purposeful hiring model. And beyond the hiring on the basis of impact, we hire into living wages. So living wages are not just minimum wages, but we used a world-renowned methodology called the Anchor methodology, where the assessment is what does it take to not only have a meaningful wage, but to have safe housing, to have savings, and it's all based off of what the local wage is. So we've adhered to that methodology. We've done numerous audits with external parties, everything from MIT and Poverty Action Labs all the way through our B Corp certification. So we've got a strong track record, and have basically put our hiring and our wage practices out for the world to see, because it's something that is not an easy thing to do that level of purposeful hiring into a full-time employment role. So in terms of the why the wages, well, living wages are exactly what I just shared. So to give you a sense of it, in California, right, I think the minimum wage in the Bay Area is going to be somewhere around $18 an hour, right? And that might be $9 somewhere else. In Kenya, where most of our workforce is, the minimum wage is 15,000 shillings, and we pay at a minimum almost 29,000 shillings. Okay, and that is for an entry level position with full time benefits. So they're meaningful wages, they're meaningful jobs that are equivalent of what a teacher might make, what a firefighter might make. And so yes, as a first time job, it's meaningful, and it speaks to the fact that we have significant not just sort of waiting lists, but that the jobs not only are about getting into that employment, but getting experience so that people can either go back to college, so we have scholarship programs, or move on to higher paying work. Our intention is not to bring in people as computer scientists, right? It's to provide that first time entry level job.
So, as a follow up to the previous question, I understand the idea of living wages and giving them the correct wage for their job, especially since it is a first job. And for our listeners, here's a bit of background. Sama has been accused of making some of the workers in Kenya, through its contract with OpenAI, read sexually and label sexually disturbing text. Is also accused of not paying them fair wages. I believe that was about $2 per hour. So you say livable wage, you say that's livable wage. Isn't the minimum wage in Kenya about $2? And even looking at it from a perspective of a New Yorker where the minimum wage is $15, I'm not sure that's helpful in this economy. Granted, that was 2 years ago.
That's minimum wage. It's not living wage.
Is $2 per hour, is that the minimum wage for that kind of work?
And
So
no,
what
the minimum wage is actually 15,000 shillings. That equivalent is, I'd have to do the math on that, but it's much less than $2. I'm certainly happy to share data with you, Esther, but it's all relative income. So when we're talking about, again, hiring, if you're familiar with this industry, a lot of work is happening in the crowd, and people get paid by the task sense. No benefits, no guarantees, whatever work is out there. Much of it is crowd driven, so the prices are sort of surge priced, right? So the more volume, the lower the price. This is full time living wage paid work, right? Employment with benefits, so medical, dental, vision, 21 days of vacation, sick leave, full time secure employment for people who've never worked before, and have an opportunity to basically create the digital skills necessary to participate in the digital economy. Beyond that, when I'm talking about living wages, that is all in a local context. So there's a living wage in Uganda, there's a living wage in India, and the living wage in India is going to be substantially different. It's actually going to be a lot less than that number of shillings I mentioned. In terms of the local context, I mean, this is where I would encourage you to go and take a look at livingwage.org, or look at the Kenyan minimum wage, is that it is 15,000, and you're coming into an entry level job that is nearly twice that amount of money. That's why I shared with you the comparable positions. Teachers, right? Bank tellers, this is what these this entry level position is comparable to.
That explanation sounds fair enough, but when you add in the stuff about some of the content that the annotators had to view, that I can almost see that as like hazardous labor, where you get a premium because you have to do this kind of noxious work, and some of the labeling with the offensive stuff, violence, sexual violence, other really bad stuff. So, did you pay a premium for that kind of work?
Yes, there's a premium for that kind of work, but I want to clarify, and I think this is important, Sean, and as is that that initial work that was ultimately a pilot project for OpenAI, it went beyond the boundaries of work that we were comfortable doing, so we canceled that project. It was only in existence for a handful of months. We can't, we shared our concerns, and we don't do content moderation work. So we've fully exited that business. Beyond that, it was never part of a core of what we were doing. So less than 4% of our work. So the 96% is in annotation with our specific hiring practices. That work was not work that followed the norm. There were resiliency tests, wellness counters. It was a completely different line of work that we've fully exited. And ultimately, it's not our focus area. It never has been. It was really two engagements that occurred. We exited that, and to make sure that we were, basically not going to get into a situation like that again, meaning where opportunities coming in may not fall in line with the areas we want to focus in. We created a service line boundary policy, basically, that says this is very directly, this is the work we will do, this is the work we will not do. That includes sensitive or harmful content moderation. That includes not working, for weapons, weapon manufacturing and big tobacco and a number of other areas that, we feel is not our core focus or in alignment with our mission. So
We're talking about data labeling and data annotation, right? Obviously, your company may not do this anymore, but there are other companies who do require workers to go and annotate in this type of way, in the way that annotators may feel uncomfortable. So, is it fair, or is there a fair way to label AI models like large language models or like language models while there's abiding by the rules of ethics? Also, why hire people outside the country to do stuff, or people outside the European world to do things like this? I mean, I know you guys are mission driven, and I think of like, okay, we're trying to get those underrepresented communities their first job, which makes perfect sense. Why hire them to do these dirty work or do this work that they may or may not want to do?
yeah, well, I mean, there's really a couple of things. Is our social mission is predicated on being able to get access to the digital economy. So this is the largest set of sort of jobs and investment, right? I'm sure you've seen and read. I'm sure you're probably even in better research than me in terms of understanding the GDP and the value that is going to be created from AI. Do we think only one group of people should benefit from that? Is that the belief that there shouldn't be participation in the digital economy? This is where all the jobs are going to be created, right? A huge portion of jobs are going to be created. And one of the reasons we focused on impact sourcing is because if all the jobs were available locally, if there was a huge amount of jobs available, well then that would be fine, right? Great. People would be able to work in a work in economy. But part of the challenge is, and if you take a look at the OECD data, 86% of employment in sub-Saharan Africa is from the informal economy. So the informal economy means everything from, selling secondhand clothes to, doing construction. It's not, there aren't benefits. You have to show up to work. If you're sick, you don't earn money. And those the ability to create jobs and bring in jobs from other parts of the world is part of the global economy. Sure, you can say, well, why anybody participate in the digital economy? Well, it's for job creation. The whole reason why we launched this approach was not around sort of giving aid. It was about giving work. It's about creating financial independence in an ecosystem. So our 97% of our workforce exists within Kenya. We've created well over 10,000 jobs. Tens of millions of dollars of salaries and income and benefits that have affected family members and communities, creating an ecosystem where there are digital skills, job creation. That's significant. If there were plentiful jobs, meaning you sort of take it or leave it, then that would be amazing. Like that would be absolutely amazing. But that's not the situation. And being able to have people from around the world globally, in particular the ones that have the greatest barriers to employment, have access to the digital economy is important. I mean, unless the thought is that those jobs should be preserved for a certain group. I don't think so. I think that the world needs to participate, and the people across the world need to be able to access jobs in the digital economy.
I definitely agree that people around the world need to be active in the digital economy. I think it's definitely right to say, okay, we have to have everyone participate. My idea is the idea of data labeling. And even I have discussed this with you before about like why do we need a human in the loop? Um, and what we are talking about are people with strong ethical convictions are definitely different from people in America. So they have different ethical convictions. So I guess my question is, what are the ethical implications? How do we have data labeling where we say, okay, we're talking about we don't want Americans to be subject to these bad things in things like ChatGPT, but it's okay to ask others who are labeling them to be subject to those things. Is that correct? How can we have an ethical way of doing data labeling?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. Like, so first off, if it could be done all automated, it would have been done. I think that every company in the world, especially these larger companies that are building these models, if it could be done in an automated fashion, then they'd do it, right? We'd basically be in the singularity, right? So in other words, if all data was already structured and could be interpreted by ML, by machine learning, then we would be in a different world, right? Everything would be automated. We'd literally be in Skynet territory, if you've ever seen the Terminator. The nature of this is that the automation isn't there yet. So models require training, right? And they get a certain data set. It's almost impossible, like if you think about it, especially as the world changes, to know every combination of every sort of possible outcome, right? And so these data scientists, they build their models based off a set of parameters. They try to train their model to be as intelligent as possible, and then they need training data, which is what we do, to be able to validate that the model works as intended. So let me use a different example, not an LLM, but let's just take an example of a self-driving car. Okay, a self-driving car, to be able to function properly, needs to be able to have lots of roadway data. It could be roadway data, here in the U.S. It could be roadway data in the U.K., where people are driving on the other side of the street. It could be roadway data that occurs in like a 12-lane roundabout in China, right? These are all very different situations. So the approach is, of course, gather as much data as possible. Well, then what ends up happening when it snows? All of a sudden, everything is covered with snow, hail, rain, dusk, dawn. There are so many different elements. And so, what happens is you need to build as much training data as possible to create a model that's effective. But there may be a scenario that the model hasn't seen before. One, you need a human in the loop to validate, okay, the model's detecting things as expected. It detects pedestrians and people of all shapes, sizes, and colors. It recognizes all sorts of vehicles. It recognizes scooters, bicycles, etc. And so that's really where the goal of having the right data labeling solution becomes really key, because you need complete and effective data, and you need a human in the loop to then validate that the AI or the model is interpreting that data as expected. Because if it isn't, then you need to be able to flag that and then reflect and retrain that model. It's a very long way of saying, Esther, that humans in the loop and validation of comprehensive and effective data sets, by definition, require validation. They're working as expected. So human in the loop is necessary. It's not possible at this point in time to auto label everything. In fact, we have synthetic data partners, where synthetic data is something that is definitely, I think, an important emerging part of AI, because synthetic data helps round out the data that's difficult to collect. Well, we're even working with synthetic data partners to validate that their synthetic data is created as expected. So we're using a human in the loop to validate these synthetic data, because if it's auto generated, you need to ensure that it's actually working as expected.
Okay, that's interesting. So what is Sama's approach to bias just in AI algorithms and data labeling? So how do you work to ensure that bias is removed from the training data?
So it all starts with really understanding what sits in your data set. So as I mentioned before, right, the data scientists, the people who are building these models are going to collect as much data as possible. Maybe they'll use an open source data set. Maybe they'll leverage data from their sensors or software. And in the example, I'll just carry forward the self-driving car example. So if you collect a data set, right, you're training your model on it, but you find that your model is not, it's doing great on lane detection, but it's not doing very well on, say, road signs. So then uh, to ensure that, we have a software called Sama Curate, which allows us to understand what's sitting in your data. We can say, great, by the way, you're going to need more road signs. In particular, you're going to need some stop signs and yield signs if you want that to be able to be effectively detected. So the goal is to try to not only understand, am I labeling the data that I is in my data set, am I labeling that accurately, correctly? But equally importantly is, what data are you missing? Do you have edge cases? Do you need to round out your data source to ensure that it is complete, so you can reduce bias and you can ensure that the model is performing as effectively as possible?
Last year in 2023, Sama launched a generative AI product. In this age of generative AI, how has Sama shifted its strategy? How do you think Sama will continue to evolve? And how do you think the data labeling market will evolve as a whole?
Yeah, so generative AI, I know it feels like overnight that became just just huge. Well, it's been in the workings for a while. So this notion of large language models and foundation models has been around a bit, but obviously the world changed a bit when a few of these large models came into production. Generative AI is, we see this as something that is going to continue to really accelerate the adoption of artificial intelligence, and it's going to really reduce the barriers towards developing AI. These foundation models, over time, while we've seen this kind of the biggest, most famous ones, right? So like Google Bard, right? ChatGPT, etc. Um, Mendes got a Meta Llama as an example. They are large foundation models that can be leveraged for many different uses, but they're general. So what we're finding is that companies that want to build AI off of generative models still need to tune those models built off of Gen AI with their own data sets for their own app, for the specific purposes of their application. So we're seeing that certainly is a trend, is that anything built off of Gen AI still needs to be validated, trained, and tuned with application specific data. The second thing that we're certainly seeing is that models over time are going to get more and more specialized, because those large models are for general use. You might end up with a, I don't know, financial foundation model that helps you interpret, public financial statements, because it's going to require a lot more specific data and specific knowledge of that space. So we think they're going to get more and more specialized over time. But going back to what I said a little bit earlier, the key thing is that generative AI not only allows models to predict outcomes, but it actually then generates next steps. And so it becomes even more important once those models are put into the wild, that they are validated by humans in the loop to ensure that they are still working as planned, because they collect more and more data, they make more decisions. Is it still the same model? Is it still performing as you expected?
So I wanted to ask a follow-up question in terms of data infringement. What are your thoughts, especially in the age of generative AI? There's been lots of copyright lawsuits in terms of generative AI. As a data labeling company, do you come across infringement? How do you handle it?
You're hitting the nail on the head, sir. I think there's a huge importance to data provenance, right? So it's kind of like, if you built something that was built on something else, where did that data originally come from? Do you know where it came from? Was it licensed, right? Is it sort of copyrighted or trademarked? And are you, ensuring that you're not only getting it from a reputable source, meaning whatever source collected it with the full knowledge of the people who are participating in it. And I think that is going to be really critical, and it's very important, because first of all, we need to consent when our data is being used, right? The second is that you need to know that if you contribute to that model. So many people sign up for some of these models, and of course there's fine print, right, that says anything that you input is now part of our model, right? So now we're seeing, of course, many of these companies, they have really clear licensing agreements, and you can license certain aspects of the foundation model, so that so that your data, if you use the model, is not being included in the foundation model, right? So you can pay for sort of a licensed version of that. But beyond that, I think the key point is that we need to have that level of transparency. The EU put out a landmark policy back this last summer, and it was really focused on a few things. One of it is data provenance, right? Where did the data come from? Is there a clear, sort of access consent, and do we know where that data came from? And ensuring that it's being used in the proper way. So that's really important for both data privacy reasons, and IP reasons. The second component of it is about transparency and how that AI was built, right? So generative AI, it's actually not just again interpreting, but it's creating now. So how do you make sure that that's explainable and that the business rules, if you will, that the AI was built on are transparent? And that's going to become really important over time, because think about it this way, right? Even a hairdryer has a warning. Right? It says, like, if you plug this in your water, you might electrify yourself. Well, just saying this was created by Gen AI isn't going to be good enough, right? Think about sensitive areas like lending, right? Or surveillance or policing. That's why it's really important to identify these areas where there could be, I'm sure, unintentional, but bias or other challenges created, where it needs to be extremely transparent in how the models are actually working. You need that much more than it was created by Gen AI. You need that sort of visibility. And so that transparency in how the AI is being built is something that's really important. And to our earlier conversation, as well, Esther, it's how it's being built is important as well. We are strong advocates of both regulation and policy. You need to have that for these globally impactful applications. And it's not just where the data came from, how it was built. So what are the business rules associated with it, and did you do so in an ethical manner? Meaning paying living wages with transparency. So we're advocates of that, 100%.
So on regulation, I hear you saying you do support regulation, the EU, but the US is far behind in that area. We have the New York City bias in hiring, AI bias in hiring law, or AI used in hiring. We have the California Data Protection Act. So who's going to do this stuff you just talked about here in the US? Is it Congress and nationwide, or are we going to still rely on the FTC and the various regulatory agencies?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the Biden administration did put out recent. They're not quite policies, but they're basically practices for transparent and ethical AI, and asking some industry leaders to step up to that. So I think that's a very good first step in that direction. There are some really pretty amazing organizations with people who, quite frankly, are much smarter than me working on this. So it's like the Global Partnership for AI. The OECD is working on some of these issues. But I think the key thing is, and I mean, I think it'd be amazing if we had a global policy, but like we can't even agree on climate change as a globe, which is still like beyond me, that's hard. So AI is to think we're going to make that big leap would be pretty tough. But there are great partnerships like the Global Partnership for AI. And beyond that, I think the key thing about this is that, when has self-regulation ever worked in an industry? It really hasn't. You need to have that check and balance, and this will be the most pervasive technology. If we don't have that, I know I simply put it as like a warning label, but if we don't have that level of transparency for how your lending is approved, or how your how your community is safeguarded, and there's so many other applications beyond that, well beyond the kind of the high priority or sensitive ones that governments have already begun to identify. Yeah, it's definitely important, and I think it is going to be pervasive, and it's heartening to see some changes, or I should say some action in place. The EU, I think, did a nice job of not only outlining kind of, and they sort of did so with GDPR as well, sort of paving some of the way, but outlining, I think, some pretty clear steps. But what I thought was pretty unique about that is they have also sort of used it as a way to say that AI that's built here in Europe is like transparent and trusted. It's kind of like the fair trade certified, or like the organic, the organic version of AI. You've got this sort of certification that that the quality of the AI that's being built there has gone through all these different steps. And we actually see it even with the clients that we work with in Europe. They're not only looking at how do we ensure our data is kept private, but what are the other sort of ESG standards that are in place for partners like us. And we're seeing that happen with our clients in the US as well. So there's a long way to go, but there's
And
some
that fair
positive.
trade analogy is a good one.
So we're talking about AI regulation, and in 2023, there has been a push for an AI pause. Do you think we need to slow down the technology?
It's a really good question. And, as sort of like the horses out of the barn, right? These models are out there in the wild. So I think it's more of a recognition that we need to. I don't know that they're slowing technology. If that is going to be something that is possible, and I know that from a regulation standpoint, I think that is one of the big questions. Is how do you ensure things like regulation and that these big like really pervasive technologies have checks and balances for all the right reasons, right? To ensure that they're working effectively, fairly. But then there's also a question of if you take that super super strictly, what will happen is that innovation could be stifled, and it favors really large companies, right? Because they're the only ones who can have the sort of staff to be able to comply with everything. So I think there's going to be a real balance in terms of the sliding kind of scale of how do you find that balance of significance, in regulation versus stifling innovation. So I think there's some good work that's happening there. But to answer your kind of question is should there be a pause? It's not possible to pause. People, engineers aren't stopping development. There's open source out there. Anybody can go and build. It's going to be a matter of putting the appropriate attention. And I think, governments and these sort of industry bodies that are doing, I think, really good work to try to be as informed as possible. That's where we're trying to contribute. So we have team members who are part of the Global Partnership for AI. We contribute to a policy, and where people ask, we're happy to provide an opinion to see what we can do to push forward what we think is an important agenda.
So finally, Wendy, thank you for being here. Where do you see Sama going from here?
That's a great question. So AI is going to be pervasive in so many different things. We are a big proponent of understanding what is sitting in your data, right? Data is what makes AI effective. So our goal is to ensure that we provide the most, complete, comprehensive data sets that we can really help our clients, understand how to create, effective AI. And that, very importantly, that the human in the loop is critical to this. There's more and more automation, and the foundation models get smarter and smarter. You need a human to validate that those models are working as expected. So the human in the loop is critical to the deployment of AI, to validate that it's working as planned, to help curate and understand what the models are missing. We are excited to be part of this wave to hopefully help make some more effective AI, and to do so while transforming lives.
Well, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it very much. You're a good representative of your company. And for our listeners, you can catch up with Wendy on LinkedIn. Esther's written a couple of stories about Sama, and we'll be tracking you in the future. And please check those out on Tech Target News. Appreciate you coming on with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sean and Esther. Great questions, great dialogue. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.